welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. I am your host Tyrant, where we take things from movies, TV shows, pop culture, try to create them in the real world and test them one-on-one from the media that they come from. Now in today's episode we're going to be taking a look at Black Panther Claws, or more generally just fantasy claws. I'm actually a big fan of these. I think these are really cool with some context, and the context is I would never consider these to be a main weapon. These are not a primary weapon. These are not the only weapon you would have. Now in fantasy, a lot of the characters, this is their primary weapon. That's fantasy. That's not the real world. These would not be your primary weapon. But with that context, for today's episode, as a backup weapon, not even as a secondary, just as like a backup to have if you lost everything else, I think they're pretty cool. So let's try and make some today. It was a little bit of a hassle trying to make these things, but anyway, we'll make some and then we'll get to the testing. Should be fun. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So the build for the Panther Claws. The first thing I did was I grabbed a pair of gloves that I had that I actually purchased for this project way back when. Then I got the stainless steel finger protectors and bent them into a more claw-like shape and fitted them to the gloves individually. I wanted them to be tight, but not too tight. Then I took them over to the belt sander to put a sharp point on them. Now remember, there's a difference between something like a claw that is made for tearing and something like a blade that is used for cutting. These are claws, they will tear. So they do have a sharp point, they are sharp, but I don't expect them to like slice through things for the most part. I expect them to puncture and tear through things. Then I used some epoxy. Now getting the actual claws to stay on the gloves was really difficult. I used so much epoxy. I originally only used a little bit, but they weren't staying on correctly. I used a combination of super glue and a whole bunch of epoxy, so instead of looking really nice and pretty, they look terrible now, but hopefully they will stay put when we use them in testing. But that's pretty much everything for the build process, so let's get to some B-roll and then get to the testing. Okay, we have finished up the Black Panther Claws. They ended up turning out a little bit more janky than I was actually planning on them, if I'm being completely honest with you. It was a whole ordeal to get the nails, and then once I got the nails, for some reason, they wouldn't actually attach to the glove, and I don't think it was the rubber. I just don't think that the steel wanted to attach them. It's a whole thing. Anyways, I've got one hand that is fully sharpened, and then the other one that is not really. It's just for looks because, like I said before, for some reason they only sent 4 in each set. So I'm gonna have to use my right hand today. Story of my life, eh? Anyways, let's start with some simple mediums like a bottle. These are all sharp. I don't actually know if these are gonna break very quickly. So today's episode might be a failure and it might end right now. But let's start with this. All right, so what are we thinking? Maybe just like a slat? Nah, or like a... Okay, one of them. All right, we'll do a thrust. That felt f***ing weird. How to describe what that felt like without being... That felt weird. I felt my, as you can see, it was this finger here. This one here is wet. I'm not helping myself, am I? Let's do that again. I'll try slash, because the thrust felt dirty. Yeah. If you haven't already, you should consider subscribing. It's free and it would really help out the channel. Tony thinks you should do it. Let's get back to the video. I have lost a lot of my dexterity though, especially when I'm trying to grab little things. Okay, this sounds weird too. All right, so let's try a sort of like a slash. Ready? I was ready for it that time. That didn't feel nice, but that also didn't hurt or anything. And as you can see, that was effective. Let's do it again. Let's try one finger. I know guys, chill out in the comments. Let's try the one finger first. I mean, I That was full insertion. There's no other way to describe this other than it actually is working. Like, it cuts through the bottle. It's actually working. It's tearing a little bit, which is honestly to be expected. All right, let's grab Tony and let's see what we can do to him with our fingers. Okay, honestly, I don't expect to get through the arm or anything. I'm actually more curious how it feels on the fingers to actually do like palm strikes, right, or slashes. So let's see what happens. We can see that they cut. So now I'm going to finger Tony. I said it as a joke, and then after I said it, I'm like, I should not have said that. I should not have said that. All right. I'm gonna do a palm strike here. Oh, that one hurt though. Even fully braced, that one hurt. I did not like that. You can see how much sort of cutting capacity they have. I'll try a slash. It doesn't hurt unless I do something stupid, like that first one hurt a little bit, but all of those subsequent strikes and even that slash didn't hurt too much, if I'm being completely honest with you. And just to round us out for today's episode, let's see if I can, I mean, it kind of works. Like, I am penetrating and stabbing into it. That is 100%. See, even that, right? I'm hitting a pool noodle, literally foam for the most part. And that did not feel good. And if it hurts like that, hitting foam, imagine hitting something solid like when I hit Tony. That was completely ineffective. Now, when it came to the water bottles, which is funny enough, it actually performed really, really well in the water bottles. It penetrated those things. Whatever, okay? It's double entendre day, all right? But when it comes to these pool noodles, yeah, for some reason, it just sucks. But I think that's going to be all today's episode. It's kind of a failure, if I'm being completely honest. Now, before anybody comments, these are sharpened pieces of steel. These are sharp. Ow. So, I was going to do a little scratch, and every time I did it, I poked myself. These are sharpened bits of steel, and they could cut my flesh if I really tried. So with the testing out of the way, I thought I'm not going to give it a score, but I will give it some generalized thoughts. I still think that they are reasonably practical. I think they can work. Remember, the context is not as a main weapon. And I do think that it was just my design that kind of failed me. What happened was, because the claws were kind of extended from my fingers, it created a pivot point, so when I hit something, they could pivot independent of my fingers, which is not a good thing. So if I was to revisit it in the future, I would want something that would go a little bit more over my finger to keep them more stable, so I can actually use that power in the fingers to generate force. As a concept, I think that there's enough there. I think that there's enough there that they could work. Obviously, there's not vibranium, and they're not going to be cutting through steel and all that other sort of stuff, but I do think that they could be used in a effective offense capability, specifically not as a main weapon. Man, that was a bit of a mouthful to get through. But that's going to be all for today's episode. I genuinely hope you enjoyed. This was a fun one. I like the design. I like them in fantasy, and even in the real world, I think they're not too bad. But that's going to be all. Thank you guys for watching. I genuinely hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, I'll see you next week in another episode. Have a good one.